All right, let's jump right in. Today we're breaking down a very specific historical theory that comes from our source materials. It's a theory that claims there's been a long, calculated effort to reshape American society from the inside out. We're going to walk through the argument step by step, exactly as it's laid out in the texts.
To kick things off, the sources start with this quote, attributed to Vladimir Lenin. It's a pretty dramatic way to begin, right? But it gets right to the heart of the idea we're exploring, that a small, really dedicated group can have a massive impact. This is basically the premise for the entire argument.
So what's the big claim here? What's the core accusation? Well, the source materials are putting forward a pretty bold thesis, that there's been a long-running, deliberate campaign of ideological warfare waged against the United States, designed to subvert it from within.
Now, to really get this, we've got to talk about a key term, ideological subversion. The sources really lean on the testimony of a guy named Yuri Bezmenov, who they identify as a former KGB agent. And he claimed that the KGB's main job wasn't James Bond-style spying. Nope. It was psychological warfare, a slow, patient process of changing how a country thinks and feels about itself.
This next quote from Bishop Fulton Sheen really paints a picture of the threat as it's described in the text. The idea here is that this ideology isn't something that builds, it's more like a scavenger. It feeds on a society that's already, in their words, breaking down morally or spiritually.
Now here's where it gets interesting. The sources we're looking at, they don't say this is a new thing, not at all. They argue you have to go way, way back, all the way to the founding of the United States to really understand what they claim is happening today. They try to build this case with a timeline stretching back centuries.
So check out the timeline they lay out. It's meant to show this isn't some flash in the pan. They start with a warning from James Madison himself in 1788, talking about people with insidious views. Then they point to the arrival of early socialists, a wave of Marxists in the 1840s, and then events like the Haymarket Affair, which they use to connect the labor movement to these bigger ideological currents.
Okay, and this is where we get to the real heart of the argument, and it all revolves around this one guy, Manning Johnson. He's presented as a former high-ranking communist who had a change of heart, and his testimony is used to make a very specific claim about a plot to divide America.
And here, in his own words, is why the sources see him as such a credible voice. He's not just some critic on the outside. He's basically saying, hey, I was on the inside. I lived and breathed this for a decade before I walked away. That gives his testimony a lot of weight within their narrative.
So what was the bombshell from Johnson's account? He alleged that the Communist Party had identified a #1 target, a single weak spot they believed could bring the whole country down: racial tension. The strategy, as he laid it out, was to poke and prod at that one vulnerable point until the entire social fabric just ripped apart.
This is fascinating. Johnson describes what's basically a bait and switch. You've got the public message, unity, civil rights, social equality, but he claimed that behind the curtain, the real goal was totally different: to infiltrate communities, stir up chaos, and use the righteous cause of civil rights as a vehicle for their own political agenda.
And according to Johnson, the tactics were incredibly specific. We're talking about infiltrating core community institutions like churches, using what he called bedroom politics to spy on and blackmail black leaders, and just generally pouring fuel on the fire of any grievance to create hate. He even claimed they weaponized language, turning a term like Uncle Tom into a tool to silence any black leaders who didn't go along with their plan.
But here's the thing. According to the source material, these tactics weren't just random acts. They were all part of a very specific 4-stage playbook for ideological subversion, a master plan that they, once again, attribute to the ex-KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov.
And here they are. 4 stages. First, demoralization. Then, destabilization. That leads to crisis, and it all wraps up with the final stage, normalization. The idea is that it's a slow burn, a methodical process to completely remake a country from the inside out. So, stage 1, demoralization. And this is the long game. We're talking 15 to 20 years. That's basically the time it takes to educate an entire generation. And the goal, according to this theory, is to slowly chip away at the bedrock of a society, things like patriotism, family, and religion.
Okay, so once that foundation is weakened, you move to stage 2, destabilization. This is where you start kicking the legs out from under the system itself, the economy, defense, foreign relations. The whole point is to create as much instability and chaos as possible. To show what this third crisis stage looks like, the source material points to examples from today's world. They use this quote from Representative Maxine Waters, for instance, arguing that this kind of rhetoric is exactly what that crisis phase is all about.
And that brings us to the final stage, the end game, normalization. This is where the dust settles from the crisis. The new ideology, the one that was once seen as radical or subversive, is now just normal. It's the new status quo, and the transformation is complete.
Okay, so that's the historical framework. But how does this theory supposedly connect to the world we live in right now? Well, the final part of the argument tries to draw a straight line from that past to the present, pointing to modern institutions and political figures.
One of the first places they point to is our universities. They use testimony from way back in the 1930s to claim that a major institution like Howard University was an early target for this kind of infiltration, alleged to be hosting conferences and employing faculty with communist ties.
Now, this is where the sources really try to connect all the dots. They take those old claims about Howard University and Manning Johnson's description of the NAACP. Then they link them to modern figures, like Kamala Harris, noting she's a Howard grad and citing her father's political views. They do the same with Raphael Warnock, pointing to claims about his education. Now, it is absolutely crucial to stress, these are the specific connections being made in the source materials we're examining.
So, if you boil it all down, what's the one big takeaway from these sources? It's this. They're arguing that what they described is not just history. Their claim is that this is a living, breathing strategy, a long-term plan for division that they believe continues to unfold today.
And that's the whole theory, laid out from start to finish. It's a detailed and, let's be honest, pretty provocative argument. And it leaves you with a huge question, right? For any society, how do you actually draw the line between real grassroots movements for social change and something that might be a calculated, external, ideological campaign? That is a tough one to answer. Thanks for tuning in.